Welcome everybody. Welcome to BioNB's winter webinar series on market research. What, why, and how. Today we've got two presenters lined up for you. Myself, Meaghan Seagrave, I'm the Executive Director of BioNB. We're the bioscience agency for the province of New Brunswick. And we've also got Hadi Salah online as well. He's the Senior Industry Analyst for Mars out of Ontario. Both of us come with backgrounds that are rooted in bio and health sciences, but market research is the same regardless of what sector, regardless of what type of operation you're doing, whether it's technology, whether it's life sciences, pharmaceutical, or even if it's service-based. Market research is market research, and without it, you really don't have a really good understanding of who your target customers are and how big that potential market size is. So let's go through some basics. Market research. What does it mean? Why is it important? And how do we get started in terms of where we find some information? Market research is basically how am I going to define what I have, who I have it for in terms of my customers? Is there anyone else out there offering a similar product or service? How should I market to them once I figure out exactly who they are? And can I segment my customer groups? So it's asking all of your typical, 5W questions. Who, what, when, where, why, and then add the how in. Without doing the market research, you are opening yourself up to a lack of understanding of who your target customers are, how big that potential market is, so how much activity and opportunity is really there. And frankly, without doing some basic market research, you don't have a business because you don't know who you're selling your product or your service to. Why is it important? We need to be able to answer a few questions in order to understand where we're going with our product or our service, and we need to be able to answer these questions in order to effectively expand on our business plans. So what your value proposition is, who your customers are, what their needs are, and how you're going to make money selling to them. All of these are important components of a typical business plan, and if you are not able to articulate these and flesh them out, then once again, you really don't have a business. So in order to get you started, I've come up with sort of a list of questions, and I tried to put this in a different perspective just to make it a little bit easy to understand. So the analogy that I'm going to use today, at least on my end, Hadi will probably go into a lot more in-depth stuff, but I look at gathering market intelligence kind of like online dating. When you are filling out a profile for online dating, you're creating a product or service that is you. You're also looking for information on somebody else who would be a potential partner. So what are the types of questions that you would want to ask so that you learn about them, so that you could better potentially run into them, meet up with them, good compatibility, that sort of thing. These are the same types of questions that supporters, funders, and investors are going to ask of you. So this is really all part of that market intelligence gathering. Have we got any questions so far, Jenny?
Not yet. Thanks, Meaghan.
I think we're good. I guess we'll just keep going. So these are some of the market intelligence questions that you probably want to start with in terms of what you want to ask. So if I go back to my analogy of online dating, who are you and who are you selling to? You need to know who you are, and you need to know who it is you're going to be selling these products to. Where are these people that you want to sell products to? This is defining whether your market is local, regional, national, international, or all of the above. Where are you going to start? If you go back to the online dating analogy, chances are within your profile and the profile that you're looking to
some compatibility, you want to start dating people within your immediate radius or within your immediate sort of region. You're not going to be necessarily looking internationally for that compatibility. It would be a little bit difficult, I would expect. You need to know what your offering is, but in terms of that offering, you need to understand what the pain point of that end client is. What need are you filling of theirs? So again, these are basic questions, but if you can't answer these, then you really haven't done the market research that you need to do in order to properly flesh out what your market is, how you're going to get there, who your end consumer is, and what they're going to buy and how much they're willing to pay for it. If you can start to answer some of these questions, you'll be able to flesh that out a little bit more. Why would your end customer want to buy it? What need of theirs are you trying to satisfy? What are they looking for? Goes back to that pain point, the need that you're filling. When, where, and how would they be using it and or consuming it, depending on the type of product or service that you're offering. These questions might seem a little bit simplified, but that's where you need to start. And the more information that you start to obtain about the potential client that you think you're looking at selling to, that's going to validate whether or not you have a real market or not. And it's okay to head down one track and think, okay, this is the client that I think I'm selling to, and this is the reason why, the pain point that I believe I'm trying to satisfy. You could get a ways into this market intelligence research and come back and saying I was completely wrong, this is not the end client, or these are not the purse string holders or the individuals with the money to buy my product or service. It could very well likely be an adjacent type of consumer, or if you're selling a product or a service into an institution or an organization, which department are you selling into? Who are the ones who hold the money and make the decisions? You could, as I said, you could end up starting down one path and then being completely, I guess, sort of changing your mind based on the information that you come back with. Who's your competition? Who else is out there? What other products or services are out there that are similar to yours or may be a good synergistic fit with what you have? Not only from a competition perspective, but it's also good to know who else is out there who is playing around in your space. From a market intelligence perspective, this can give you information on potential equity investors, on potential partnerships, on potential R&D partnerships. The list goes on and on. Your market research will also start to put you towards what's the right price? What are people willing to pay? What's the market or that particular consumer? What cost are they willing to bear? This is where your business model is going to start to come out and flesh out a little bit more. So the whole market intelligence question piece is much bigger than just the who, what, where, when, and why questions. Hadi will start to flesh that out a little bit more in terms of where you can go to get some of this information, how you can gain access to it, etc. So that's it for my sort of 10 minutes in. If you want to just kind of refresh your memory about some of the starting questions, this is going to be a recorded webinar. Jenny will make it available on our website, and you can come back to that whole online dating period. If there are questions you would ask in terms of putting together an online dating profile or how you would search somebody else's profile, those are the same type of market research questions you can ask. So Jenny, I'll just hand that back to you. Or actually, maybe I'll hand it over to Hadi, because Hadi can pick it up from here.
I have two audience questions, if you have a moment.
Absolutely.
The first question is, what do you think is the biggest misconception when it comes to market research?
I think that one of the big misconceptions is people believe that they have a consumer or a customer already identified without having done the intelligence gathering that they need to do. It's okay to be wrong. You think you can start, you have to start somewhere, but in all likelihood where you're starting and where you end are going to be radically different. So don't make the assumption that the customer that you initially identified is going to be the end consumer that you're selling to. You need to do the research to validate that. And if you can't validate that, then you don't have a real customer. If you don't have a real customer paying for a product or a service, you don't have a business. In terms of another sort of thing to keep in mind is there's a lot of information out there. Hadi will sort of tell you how to get your hands on it, but it's really up to you to analyze it and in order to validate what's out there. So you can gain all kinds of information out of some of these market research databases as well as from actual consumers, but until you have a sale or you have somebody paying for your product or service, you have not validated that market. Does that work for everyone?
That's great. So what portion of failed companies do you think failed because of poor knowledge of their market or their customer?
I don't know if I would slot a number to it. Hadi might have some statistics that are a little bit more relevant to that, but I would probably say that in terms of fleshing out business plans, this is one of the most important pieces within your business plan. And companies that do not properly identify and validate that market never get anywhere. So, you know, if you're a startup company and you have not properly identified and then properly validated the market, you're not going to go anywhere. So the 1 in 10 that succeed, those are the groups and the individuals and the entrepreneurs that have done the legwork ahead of time.
Great. Thanks, Meaghan. That's all the questions we have for now.
Great.
So I guess it's my turn. Can everyone see my slides okay? Jenny, Meaghan?
Looks good.
Yep.
Perfect. So let me introduce myself. My name is Hadi Salah. I work for Mars Discovery District. We are an innovation hub that helps entrepreneurs across multiple industry sectors, life science, health, clean tech, and ICT. We help them launch and grow and scale their businesses. And we do that through advisory support, education programs, market research, as well as access to capital. I myself, I am a senior industry analyst in the market research group, and I focus on healthcare and life science companies. So I'll give you a quick intro about our group and how you can access some of the services that we offer. Our partners are, we work with 18 regional innovation centers across the province of Ontario to provide any entrepreneur with free access to premium market research. In New Brunswick, we actually have a relationship with some of the centers that you see on the screen. So if in your province, you do have access to our services. If you go through the Venn Center, for example, or any of those logos that you see on the screen. To access our services, you must be a startup with less than $1 million in revenue and less than $2 million in capital raise. That is private capital. We do not count grants and public sources of funding. Our team is about 13 people. We have expertise in IT, life science, healthcare, clean tech, physical sciences, manufacturing, social, and not-for-profit sectors. What we can offer to entrepreneurs is, sorry, let me quickly go a deeper dive into the sectors. ICT, we have things like online, mobile, software, SaaS, hardware, telecommunications technologies. Life sciences, we cover basically all life science sectors, including devices, therapeutics, agriculture, health IT, and even consumer products. In the clean tech and advanced materials, we're looking at alternative energy, physical sciences, environmental sciences, materials, and manufacturing. The outcome is we've built a startup library on our website that anyone can access anywhere in the world. We built this library because we were, since we serve many startups every year, we service about 1,000 of them every year. We get a lot of the same questions over and over, so we decided to create an online resource that anyone can start off with before seeking help elsewhere. You can access the startup library on the marsdd.com website. We have access to over 23 premium databases, including Frost & Sullivan, Forrester, BCC Research, Data Monitor, Healthcare. These things cost over $500,000, and we provide that service to entrepreneurs free of charge through the partners I just mentioned earlier. We publish reports, we put on events, and we consult as well if more help is needed by the student. Okay, so let me get into it. I'm gonna give a high-level overview of how to do market research and sort of some of the basics about finding a market size for your product or service or offering. So I want to start with a few definitions. Market size is basically a total number of products and services that an industry sector is able to sell at a price. And usually that is quantified in a time frame, typically 1 year. Some of the aspects of market sizing is volume and value. Other definitions I want to talk about is the industry. You are part of that industry. Every startup, every product, and all your competitors make up an industry. Your market are basically all the customers in buying those products created by your whole industry. Customer can take shape in many different forms, and that includes it could be a different industry you're selling to. It could be an extremely niche segment of an industry. It could be governments, education, anything research related. And it could be consumers. It could be typical consumers, you and I, buying as customers. I'm putting these out there because it's important to think about who that ultimate buyer is for your products. I want to talk to you about a framework that I think I would recommend using when you're thinking about market sizing or developing when you're doing market research. That framework includes looking at your segments, building an estimation model, and using data and finding data that is relevant to validate that estimation model and your segment overall. Before I get into the framework, are there any questions so far?
Clear as mud so far.
Okay, no questions. Okay, perfect. I'll go on and talk about segments. Segments can take the form of many different shapes. It can be defined differently. Ultimately, it has to do with your customers. So if your customer is a consumer, you want to segment that consumer into the typical customer that you would want to sell into. For example, this is an example from American Apparel. I'm making this up, but if I was American Apparel, I would be wanting to sell specifically to not all customers, but to young adults aged 20 to 35, male and female, probably making under $100,000, probably getting into the workforce recently, and typically in urban settings. So it's important for you to define who that ultimate customer is before you move any further. Customer segments can also be about demographics, age groups. Is it families? Is it singles you're selling into? Is your product specifically targeted at a different education level? So just keep all of those in mind when you're thinking about your market. Also looking at your market, you have to be aware of the various product segments, and you have to understand where your product fits within an overall market so that you can actually focus your efforts, your marketing, and your outreach to that right product segment. When you're looking at the market, it's easy to look at market reports or statistics and say that I have this fantastic, huge addressable market. In an ideal world, sure, that's anyone out there that requires, let's say you're selling a book. Potentially 7 billion people in the world would want to read a book, so in an ideal world, that's your market. But however, you should always try and focus a bit closer to geographies that you think you can compete in, looking at your competitors in specific regions perhaps to see where you can fit in, where there is a lack of competition. Look at sales channels, which sales channels you can leverage, which we cannot, and ultimately come down to a target, a very specific target that is extremely desirable for your product, that gives you a competitive advantage, and that is feasible to go after. I worked for a while as an investment manager with a a VC, a seed stage VC, and sometimes we see companies coming in and copying and pasting from market research reports saying, you know, my cancer therapeutic is worth, it could be worth, you know, billions of dollars. But when you do a deeper dive, you realize that it's only a fraction of the cancer patient out there that can actually use that cancer drug. So sometimes that's a turnoff for investors. So you have to be very clear when you're making assumptions and looking at your market that way. Next, about segmentation, I want you to always think about, again, this is to summarize what I said, looking at your product, looking at the various segments it fits in, and look at which customers are buying into that segment from that overall idealistic potential market size. And that gives you a much more accurate addressable market for your strategy, your investors, your bank, and so on. And it's very hard to do. I mean, most information that you will find through secondary resources will give you very broad market numbers, volume numbers, dollar figures. It's up to you to use that information in a way to come up with an estimate that is more accurate. Here's just a quote from a book about what investors are looking for. It exactly mimics my experience as an investment manager with a VC fund. Big level, broad level numbers don't make a lot of sense when you're growing and when you're growing your business and trying to develop strategy. So make sure you're as niche and as targeted as possible. And how do you do that? You do that with estimation models. Before I get into the estimation models, any questions out there?
Yeah, I had a question about segmentation. When you were talking about customer traits when you're segmenting your market, you spoke about consumer traits like income, age, gender. What would be some segmentation traits if you're selling to businesses?
Sure, it's extremely broad. I mean, let's assume I'm Amazon, I'm selling cloud services. Obviously, there are tons of competitors out there. If I want to make a niche for myself, maybe cloud services are not affordable for startups. Maybe I want to target the startups. So instead of going after the whole market, I'm going to target the startups and their needs. I understand that startups' needs are probably very small at this stage, but they want to be able to scale very quickly. So I want to offer a product that can do that instead of offering a product that is suitable for IBM. I want to, customize my product to something that is niche for the startups. That's just one example. There are multiple different ways you can look at B2B and segment it that way. Any other questions?
That's it for now. Thanks. That was great.
Perfect. Okay. Estimation models. What is an estimation model? Here's an example of a hypothetical vaccine, and a marketing analyst is looking at perhaps building a business case to show that there's a potential market for this. This looks very fancy and complicated, but really it's a small formula that you have to input at various slots what you think based on best efforts and based on research you think some of these boxes will look like. It includes, market segments that you're going to sell into, whether it's going to be sold to public or private payers, what prices you think these people will pay, and calculate basically, multiply the various different aspects of this model and come up with a market size. You find out the potential unit numbers for the age groups, for the price they will pay, and ultimately come up with a pricing model. I would, at a high level, I would do estimation in 5 steps. Basically, map out all the possible inputs for a calculation. Fill in the data you currently have, and if you have gaps in that data, identify them. Source some data out there. Do your market research. Come back and input the data that you find, and come up with a size, with a market size. And do a few of those just to make sure that you're looking at all various different angles to come up with an accurate market size overall. there are two basic approaches when you're thinking about building a model like this. There is the top-down approach of coming up with a formula or a bottoms-up approach. The top-down approach basically looks at the true value from above, starting with very broad indicators in the market, looking at various data points, and ultimately coming up with a market size. It's very quick, it's easy to use, but sometimes gives you very high estimates. And I'll give an example of both of those. On the other hand, the bottoms up is looking at all the various suppliers out there on the market, your competitors, and see how much they sell into the market in the various segments, and add them all up and come up with a market size. It takes a bit more time, it's a bit more conservative, and usually requires primary research if you can't find some of those numbers, whether it's on suppliers' websites or reports out there. And here's an example. Let's say you sell board games. A top-down approach would look at all the different households in the country that have a child, perhaps, so families, or households that only have adults. You look at how many percentage of those households basically purchase board games, estimate how many board games they buy a year, come up with a price per game, and you can do this based on secondary research or going out and actually finding those numbers. And finally come up with a number and add it up that way. On the other hand, you could do a bottoms-up approach, and that is basically look at the major competitors that you think capture the majority of the market, see how much they sell in that geography that we just talked about, how much percent of their sales is board games, and find a total and then add it up and come up with a market size. There are pros and cons, like I said, to each, and see if there's a huge variance between the two market sizes and come up with your own assumptions. Any questions so far before I move on?
Yeah, we had a question about estimating the market size.
Yeah.
So when you're approaching an investor or you've completed your business plan, how accurate is it expected that your market size estimation would be? Can you be a little off or really far off? And how does that make investors feel?
It's a good question. I mean, as accurate as you can be, and if you can back it up. That's very, very important, because if you throw a number out there and you can't back it up, and the investor will think you're BSing. So if you have a number that seems wild, that seems highly attractive, make sure you can back it up. What steps did you take to come up with that number? And if you can justify it that way, I think investors will be very happy to listen to it and believe it. Otherwise, their gut check will say, this doesn't make any sense, and we'll discount you completely. Any other questions?
That's it. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay. Data. Where do you find the data? So I mentioned one valuable resource, and that is the Mars Market Intelligence, and you can access this through mainly the Venn Center and other partners in the province. But you can also find tons of data elsewhere. Here's some secondary sources of information that you can find for your startup. Statistics can be found through government sources mostly. There's tons and tons of data out there about statistics, demographics, where people live, how much they make, their buying patterns, and so on. Industry data can be found. A very valuable source, I would say, are investors' reports. Every public company must publish those reports, yearly, annual reports. The investment community always publishes reports on various companies. So those are usually contain very high-level data that you can use yourself. Product brochures, if you're looking at market research about specifications of a product, a competitive product or service. News articles, there's tons of information there. Patent searching can be very useful. There's obviously patent offices that you can check out. Google itself has a patent search engine. And like I said, company and financial data, highly, highly valuable. You could also be very, very creative in finding data. Here, I'm going to suggest a couple of things that you may not think about when doing your market research. Online, things like Stack Exchange or Reddit. These are forums that have tons of information about all kinds of topics. You can find things about beer you never knew about. You can find what people like, what people discuss, what they're interested in. You can post things yourself and get feedback that way anonymously. So they're great ways to check out things. There's also they're all obviously time wasters at the same time, so you have to be careful with that. Highly specialized forums. There's a forum out there about almost any industry, any topic that you can think of. So check out the most reputable ones and participate. Be active in them. Here's an alternative search engine that I really like to start off with, called Wolf from Ultra. It's the technology behind things like Siri and Google Now. You can actually use natural language to ask questions, and this search engine will come up with an answer if it can understand your question. Here, I did this morning about the median income of research assistants. It gave me a number in US dollars. It automatically converted that to Canadian dollars. It gave me some historical facts. It's a fantastic resource, I think, and highly recommend. These are not traditional ways to find research data, but go out there and check them out. And of course, libraries. I give the example here of the University of Toronto Library, but almost every university in Canada has fantastic market research resources, whether it's their business school, whether it's the library online. You can access tons of things like journal articles, market research data, statistics, and so on. The Startup Library, that's the link for our startup library that we built at Mars. It covers multiple different industry sectors. It gets you started really quickly with curated links that we think are reputable. And of course, you can access us through the various partners we have in the province. And through us, we can access some premium vendors that you see on the right side there: healthcare, Data Monitor Healthcare, IBIS World, BCC Research, and so on. Okay, so what if secondary resources are not enough? Then go out there and do primary research. Talk to your employees, talk to your customers, talk to analysts, associations, network. Gather data wherever you are. Ask questions. Do interviews. Do surveys. I find primary research to be much more valuable than secondary research. And there are tons of ways you can do that, and tons of information online to help you conduct those private research methods. Interviews is a very good common method to collect information, and there's again multiple ways to do that: surveys, focus groups, face-to-face, online, over the phone, and so on. This is just a great book that I wanted to highlight that has a whole chapter dedicated about how to do primary research. It could be very easy. It could be a 15, 30-minute process, and you collect tons of information that's valuable for you. And that summarizes basically the framework I would use to go out and conduct market research, find your market size, and be confident that the information that you present to your partners is valuable. Any questions so far?
Yeah, we have two questions about sources. The first one asks, obviously there's a large range of sources. There's free ones and very expensive ones and everything in between. How far do you think a company could go with just free resources?
It depends on the industry. A lot of industries have tons of free research out there, especially in the ICT sector. It's how you use that information. Sometimes you're not going to find extremely niche information, and so if you find really broad numbers, use those numbers and use the estimation model to try and hypothesize and make assumptions about those numbers, and focus that down, narrow it down to what you think ultimately is the market size for your niche product. Second question.
Thanks. So there's obviously the option of hiring a third party to conduct market research report for you, when do you think this would be the best option for someone?
Hiring somebody to do market research is very, very expensive. So from my experience, startups cannot do this at an early stage. Most companies, most publicly traded companies or large companies do this on a daily basis. They hire consultants, market research firms, because they can afford it. Obviously, not everyone has that luxury. So, at the early stage, I probably would say you don't need it, perhaps. You have to spend your cash in a way that helps your startup the best way possible, and market research vendors are probably not the way to go. If you follow this method, I believe that you can come up with estimates that are good enough for that first phase of your business.
So in the very beginning, just do the groundwork yourself?
Great. I just want to summarize with, sorry, go ahead.
So you're saying that in the very beginning, your best option is to do the groundwork yourself?
Yeah, 100%. Do a lot of the groundwork yourself, and if you need the expertise of an expert, then and if you have the funding for it, go for it.
Great, thanks.
Just one final slide. Other than market research, market sizing, I think market research is very, very important to show your competitive advantage. Once you know so much about the market, your competition, and how things work, you can always form a matrix, and you want to make sure that you stand out versus in this market. Usually markets are crowded. Use market research to come up with your market numbers. Obviously, that's great, but you also want to show your competitive advantage using market research. And that's basically it. That's all I want to say. And if there are any questions, happy to answer them.
Great, thank you so much, Hadi. I think that's all the questions we have in the queue now. We have a bit more to say, so if you have any questions, please type them in now. And if we can't address them during the presentation today, we'll make sure that the presenters get in touch with you. So thanks again, everyone. This presentation is going to be recorded and posted at BioNB.org. So if you know someone who would benefit from this information, please feel free to send them the link. We will be sending out a feedback survey. It should only take you 2 minutes, and it really means a lot to us. And don't forget to check out the 2 other webinars in our series. The first one's on Monday. It's about presentation skills. And the other one's called Beginner's Guide to Getting a Company Online. And that's happening on January 28th. Okay. And Meaghan had a program to talk about. Meaghan, are you there on the phone to talk about the Market Intelligence Pilot Project? I think, Hadi, you have to unmute her yourself.
She's unmuted on my end.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, did that work? Great. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Hadi, and thanks, Jenny, for piecing this together. I just wanted to mention that the province of New Brunswick Venn Centre in Moncton and Mars actually have a pilot program going on with Mars in terms of accessing some resources to do some market data. Barb Els is the contact at Venn Centre, so you can either contact us here at BioNB if this is something that you're interested in, or you can contact Barb Els at Venn Centre in Moncton, and we can see if your company qualifies for this as a service. It'll be offered up to a limited number of companies, and it will basically help you gain access to some market intelligence information. You'll have to decipher yourself as well as kind of put that into play, but the information that you have the potential to gain access and gather will be phenomenal. So if that's of interest to anyone out there, please send an email back to Jenny, and we can put you in touch with the folks that you need to and see if you're a good fit for the pilot program.